So again, thanks everybody for coming. Before we get into it, I'll give you a little bit of a bio of Kelly and why she's here, all right? And then Kelly, I want to stop off because there's a few things on there we're going to need to elaborate on because they need explanation. So Kelly Tallon Franklin is the founder and chief director of Courage for Freedom, a Canadian leading organization who exists to educate, train, and certify frontline and community service providers on proven strategies and preventive tactics to serve vulnerable victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Kelly's an international and national anti-human and trafficking task force chairperson with the Business and Professional Women and has been acknowledged and awarded many accolades globally as a survivor, advocate, activist, champion of minor-aged children and youth. Kelly, her teams, and their projects have created awareness movements and developed support for victim survivors of human trafficking and sexual exploitation that include equine therapy, trauma-informed and person-centric care approaches that are revered and respected. Kelly is a survivor, best-selling author, Courage for Freedom, award-winning speaker, respected advocate, and trainer on the issue of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, forced prostitution, and equines. Now, Kelly has a list of, like a crazy list. I don't know if you guys had a chance to see it, her list of awards, and they come from everywhere. So Kelly, I know there's a lot, all right, but I do want to pick on a few of them, and I want you to explain what happened and how you got them before we get into who Kelly is, all right?
And just to throw this in, I stand and receive awards on behalf of survivors. That's the deal.
You get to be the face that comes forward. So the first one I'll ask you, Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal of Honor. What's that about?
I started our organization and we transitioned we started with a wide funnel, and between 2007 to 2013, we'd worked with over 10,000 children and youth on our farms, providing programs and seeing how trauma-informed programs helped. We were the day camp locations for the Y, for Big Brothers Big Sisters, for Southwestern Ontario. And that's where we really saw the gaps, the deficit in services, specifically to kids, and then specifically to young girls who are being trafficked. I volunteered. So it's a volunteer award because nobody would believe that anybody would be ridiculous to volunteer the hours that we were putting into the issue.
But you did it and you got a nice
Except my husband, he knew how ridiculous.
That is her husband in the back. He's very loud back there. Frank is a great guy. Thanks, Frank, for coming as well. You got a bunch here, but I want to look at this one here. U.S. Congressional Record as Justice Champion. Mm-hmm. What's that?
It's for the Congress of the entire United States, not just the state-to-state Congress. So our organization was read into Congress to acknowledge our work as justice advocates. That was a lot of Kleenex, that one.
That was a tough one?
It was tough.
You have two here from United Nations for Women Presenter.
Yes.
What was that?
Just going and speaking my lived experience, truth, and then carrying forward amplified voices that weren't being heard because minors really can't speak to this issue. They get re-victimized. And a lot of people just want the deeper, darker, yuckier story. It's not Netflix, it's real life. And so our documentary isn't a story, it's lived experiences, and demanding that we do not ignore this issue is very important. Because what we do here in Canada has a lot of effect. We're a first world country. So the eyes of the world, especially the UN, they are on us. And whatever we decide to do, we have to have a civic responsibility and a civil responsibility to how that's going to affect people in other countries, especially those that suffer war crimes. Right now, the Ukrainian Council of Canada is on speed dial with me because young women and girls especially are getting trafficked in order to cross borders. We continue to monitor the issues in Afghanistan and what's happened to young girls and women there that are being bought and sold in order to feed their families. So we have to be cognizant of what we do in our country. And even though we're privileged and we should have the right to make all our decisions, we have to make them in the context of how that affects somebody. So I'm just not quiet about that.
I know. Listen, you'll learn. Kelly is when she goes, but it's all for the right things. Kelly and I connected maybe a year, 2 years ago,
Yeah.
like officially.
I was following your podcast on Instagram, going,
Yeah,
this is how to police, because you were talking about the communities that I actually have history in.
So now let's get to your history, all right? I'm going to put this over here. So this,
Okay.
before we get into the actual, what do you get from this, and what do you guys need as parents in the neighborhood? What are the signs and symptoms to look out for? It's qualifying. But Kelly, and your story, I tell everybody that I meet, I said, you see, Kelly, I'm like, you have no idea. You think to yourself the type of person that she'd be. But Kelly, when we first spoke, and we got along on quite a few different issues, one of the things that really took me back was where you were raised. So let's talk about that.
So I wasn't that far down the road, down near Mississauga Road, when it was developing what was fondly known then as the Manors of Sherwood. So I grew up in a home where there was 6 figures, and this is back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And my mom had a great job and didn't have to work, but had a great job in health. And my dad was a CEO of a utilities organization. And yet I was victimized.
So when you say victimized, what does that mean?
Somebody groomed, lured, recruited me, took advantage of some of the risk indicators that I had in my life. And back then, nobody talked about this. And so I'm an HT survivor, and I've got a myriad of other intersectional things, guns and gangs activity in my background.
So let's talk about that. So he grows up here in Mississauga Road. For you who don't know where that is, it's just north on Mississauga Road, or it's a really affluential area. Your father was CEO of a large hydro company in Ontario. We'll leave it at that. All right, so you can figure out the rest of it. But from there, you end up in Rexdale.
Yes.
Tell me about that transition
It
from...
used to be at Towers in the mall, and I actually played Pong there.
So how did you go from...
Really dating myself.
How did you go from a girl living in an affluent home to now you said the signs and symptoms and you were groomed? How did that first interaction
going on
happen?
in my life where there was gaps in what I needed, and emotionally there was child abuse in my background. So, those things that are called ACEs by the professionals are really risk indicators that we need to pay attention to with kids. Mm-hmm. And nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knew. Nobody knows what's happening. But somebody started to pay attention to me. And then it moved from Rexdale, and then we were into Jamestown, and the next thing we were over to Jane Finch. And then I was down in South Regent, Scouting Court, Malvern. Like, you pick the community, and my dad eventually said I was bottom feeding. I don't believe that. I believe actually there was a lot of acceptance in that community, and you understand this from gangs. When there's that level of acceptance. And the other thing is I rose up as a rising star because somewhere in me I had capacity to become a leader, very misguided. So I became a leader with gang activity and weapons and drugs and crime, and have done time and have overcome heroin addictions and homelessness. Like, you just add something, and chances are, because I'm old as dirt now, I've probably experienced it, including losing some people along the way. And that's what fuels me too. Young girls, there was a girl particularly in South Regent Park, and the article read that she was a difficult child prostitute when they found her murdered. She was 14. So those kind of things stay with you.
Oh, you said you did pen time. All right, which means she went to the federal penitentiary.
No.
Oh, sorry, Ontario.
I pleaded down.
You pleaded down to have it happen in the province, right?
Right.
When you pled down, now that it's done, why don't you tell everybody what happened?
But I did 8 months dead time at the West, so you know that what that would be like.
Yeah,
And
Metro
I
West
also-
Detention Center was the one of the hardest jails at the time.
Especially if you're doing dead time, which means no bail, no way to leave and go out before you go to court. So no preparation, no family support.
And what was it that you did that got you there?
There was some robberies and some shootings and knifings and movement of guns and drugs and intersection with different gang affiliates, from Chinese mafia to the Montreal mob.
So organized crime, ultimately, like proper, legit organized crime.
But at the time, and to think about it, you think, well, how does one person go from the one life to another? It's really just people. Because those people operating in those crimes, they're just people. Some of them are delightful.
Yeah.
And can be quite charismatic and convincing. And then once you're in, you don't want to wear cement Converse All-Stars at the bottom of Lake Ontario. So you learn how to navigate it. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to use some of my creativity to keep me alive. There's lots of people I know that we buried along the way.
Yeah, so you go from the rough spots, right? Great upbringing. What age were you when
I'm back and forth. So on the weekend, I'm in Scatting Court in my parents' brand new car, driving everybody around the community. Like, I think there was a charge actually recently in this community in Oakville that somebody had somebody's Porsche and they were doing 187 or something, and the parents didn't even know it was out of the garage. Pay attention.
Yeah, so you go back and forth, but what age was it that you...
double life.
When you met your groomer, what age were you? And where was it?
17, 18, but before then, I had intersection with lots of gang members. I was attracted to bad boys. It's a thing. When you're not being recognized by your peers and you feel like you don't fit, you're going to find somewhere to fit.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happened for me is they acknowledged how smart I was, being able to run things.
So when they acknowledged that, look, you're smart. Okay, besides this, when they initially groomed you, was it just for human trafficking, sex purposes?
First, it was to help run stuff because they realized how smart I was, but then they realized I'm smart and this sounds funny. Until I got married, just before I was 40, I got married. Never thought I'd be married. Have like the Saint George. So George Franklin is a saint, and
No, I'm not.
he is. And he's got his own baggage, we all do, but what I learned was that I was just starving for something relationally. And so what fueled it was actually the adrenaline. When I was 12, I was using drugs. So, I'm 12 years old and my parents couldn't figure out why there's no spoons in the house at Christmas time. Well, when they go out in the spring, they're all in the snow.
So
when the snow melts, because I've been cooking stuff at the window.
So the spoons, for those who aren't aware of drugs, Kelly, what drug was it?
Well, I was cooking crack then.
So at 12.
Cooking up anything. I was a cocktail drug user. If I could snort it, stick it in my arm, or I was hanging out with people like the hockey player John Litzenberger's son, and
affluent people.
George Chevallo's son, Georgie, who OD'd.
Yep. He's had 2 children, I believe, that OD'd, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Georgie Jr. was the first, and they came from affluent neighborhoods. Like, where they lived at the time would have been like the level of socioeconomic kind of status that Oakville has enjoyed. And so, just knowing that people can afford more expensive drugs in those communities. And the drug of the day then, to start these kids off, which threw us into heroin addiction, was Novohistex DH, which was actually a cough medicine.
It was over the counter.
Yeah.
You could buy it, right? And then just modify it a little bit.
Yeah, and right now, like, kids have learned how to extract codeine using paper towels and a drip method from Tylenol, over-the-counter Tylenol. So your kids can get enough drugs out of that to become full-blown addicts.
So you go through all that stuff, you go through jail.
I did time with somebody that was a little egregious too, and I got myself into trouble in jail.
In what way?
I brought a bunch of drugs into the jail because I'm going back and forth for bail hearings every day. And there was a riot. And so the guards put me in a cell with somebody named Marlene Moore. You can look up Marlene. She's the first woman to have an indeterminate sentence. So I experienced people's personalities. And that's what intrigues me today about working with officers and people in court and parents and families and people from different ethnicities, diverse backgrounds, community demographics, because I can see how all the pieces fit to help prevent this from happening to young people. And I learned a lot of that in jail,
Unfortunately.
honestly.
But yeah, it's a great experience, right, to have. I mean, hindsight.
Well, my mom says I was doing the installment plan to death, and jail probably saved my life.
Jail? A Joe or jail?
Jail.
Oh, jail probably saved your life. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're in jail. In between there, when does the human trafficking start for you? Like the sex trafficking?
It started before.
It started before. Let's talk about that briefly. How did you transition from being a 12-year-old crack addict
to... It just
to...
happens.
Like, and what, how does it just happen to the best that you remember?
You're around it. It's kind of... So one of the things... So I do all these different levels of training. The first is this, is talk. And then the next is a town hall where you that have been here have an opportunity to invite people to go a little deeper. And then we train people in a half day what to look for. And then we work with industry specialists in a 2-day. So what we do all along there, the most important thing is for every single person to learn what entrenched behaviors are. So every single one of us has entrenched behaviors. Things that we've learned, that we've had to adapt to, how we've had to figure out how to negotiate our life or our industry or our friends or our community. And that entrenched behavior, when there's a criminal element, when there's drugs, gang, you know this from gang activity, and from human trafficking, it becomes a way of life. So it's the culture of the person. And so that's why I had a nurse once say to a girl, and by the way, I've worked with over 527 young people that I've personally supported that are under 18 that have been trafficked since 2013 to learn from them. And I remember a nurse who said she was educated in trauma support being really upset at a girl because she couldn't coerce the girl to answer her questions the way she wanted to. And she said to the girl, when the girl finally said something rude back about why she was at the hospital, shock value. Mm-hmm. So that's what somebody in an entrenched culture of human trafficking will say to you to get you to stop asking questions, to not care, to prove that you're going to back up, that you only want them as a witness, you don't care if they're victimized or how much you have to use them for an article or for an arrest or intel for another arrest. That entrenched behavior is so ingrained in them that they respond in a way that's horrific. I mean, my husband could tell you a story about a girl that I talked to, I think almost a year before we finally were able to figure out where she was across the province of Ontario, bouncing from Children's Aid to Children's Aid because nobody could control her by this time. She was so out of control. She was 14. And then when my husband finally met her, an OPP officer bring her out to meet a horse. She's screaming her head off at the end of the driveway and comes walking up. And my husband says, "Who is that?" And I said, "Oh, it's so-and-so." And he says, "She's black." Mm-hmm. And the girl walking up the driveway was a white girl who had braided her hair, looked like Pippi Longstocking with overalls from Mark's Work Warehouse, and had Harry Potter glasses on. But 2 weeks before, when my husband could hear us engaging, she's speaking straight up Malvern patois, Jamaican. And so that entrenched behavior is what exacerbated this nurse, who told her she had advice to stop human trafficking in the province, and it was stay away from bad boys and keep your legs together. And we were there for a rape kit. Really bad. And so
a rape kit. For those who aren't familiar with what that is when somebody
And
gets
you guys
raped.
should check if your local hospital actually has them in stock. And if they don't, somebody needs to advocate for you.
Yeah, so rape kits are specialized units where you go in if somebody's been raped. They go there and you have special nurses which will...
Trauma nurses.
Yeah, trauma nurses which will swab for DNA samples, evidence, and make notation, and then come back and testify later in court to say, yeah, there was definitely injury here that was sustained that would be consistent with an allegation. So
Yep, and also they can also do blood tests for sexually transmitted diseases and other things like Hep C, and because when there's a 14-year-old and they look jaundiced, there's something.
yeah, and for those, the rape kits happen as quick as possible. So if
it's 24 to 48 hours.
As quick as possible. Generally speaking, though, the person in some cases would have been raped a couple hours earlier, and now they have to go through this process as well, which is a re-examination from the third party, being a complete stranger. So it's a complete. There's no other way to do it, but it's just a re-victimization of it again. And then in this particular case, pretty much for the rape kit, and the nurse says to her, "Stay away from bad boys. Close your legs."
And then is repeating the story at the nurse's station, and we could hear her with the door open. So the girl jumps off the bed, and you've got to remember this little 14-year-old is a gang chick.
Yeah.
Who has mad crazy survival skills, like
resilient.
Well, she met her match with me because I wouldn't back down from her.
Yeah. And
she respected that I understood what she was going through, but I wasn't going to let her finesse me. So finesse is a tactic that those that are trafficked learn for survival skills, and we can't take them away from them initially.
Yeah. It's ingrained in them. It's like a defense mechanism.
That's why when I do any training, I love to talk to the community about what entrenchment looks like.
So how
it presents itself.
So in a community like Oakville, similar to where you grew up, what does it look like?
So you can go on any website that talks about human trafficking, but if you want to do a baseline, I won't waste your time.
Sure.
Talking about some of the base things that you could just look up yourself. That's on the Ontario Strategies webpage. There's signs, and the signs are pretty generic, but it's like going to the doctor. If you only have one sign, for example, I, in all these years of doing this, have never seen a white van incident.
Being the white vans, that's a free candy that lures the kids in, right?
And actually, people planting stories like that, creating the frenzy of mythology, actually take our community's eyes off of the real issues we should be looking at. So it's not just so much like what the signs are. And if you want to take my business card, I can send you some slides and you can look and read through, and then you can ask me questions. Because one of the most important things is being able to ask the questions so you understand what you're seeing, that it's not just a sign, it's the behavior behind it. And like, when you go to the doctor, it's a cluster. So what are those clusters and what could they represent? And how can we get involved? So there's something I wanted you to do.
The definitions?
Yeah, I guess so. So the human trafficking definition, you've probably seen it if you're at all interested in prevention in your community. It's a type of modern slavery, and victims are treated as possessions to be bought and sold. But it's an act basically of controlling another person by means of force, threat, and deception for the purpose of exploiting them. And that's the police definition. So having force, threat, deception, and exploitation makes it the crime. It's one of the most complex crimes for any officer to police because the moving parts on it are more difficult. It's more lucrative. You and I were talking about this earlier. They can make up to $250K tax-free per girl. When they burn that one out, they go to the mall and find another one, or dump her and find another one at Fans Only or on Twitter or TikTok or wherever. And they actually target the most vulnerable in community that would not have the voice or the means to speak up for themselves. Whenever you see an article, this is the education, when you see an article in the paper, whenever you see the word sexual exploitation, you know right away that somebody that has been targeted and victimized is a minor. And I think it's really important in community, Ron, this is like the prevention advice of the year. it can be, so sexual exploitation can be sexual abuse that again involves manipulation, resulting in like a coerced exchange of sexual acts for money. But if you really want to know the down and dirty about this, that's not where it starts. Sexual exploitation can also be for drugs, shelter, food, transportation, pay an Uber bill, love, acceptance, or any other consideration. So it can start when somebody needs to couch surf and so is forced to sleep with somebody to have a place to sleep over because they've run away from home. And you probably know this, girls run away, boys get kicked out historically. And the gender narrative, it crosses over, but whoever's representing as a female usually runs and boys usually get kicked out, and that's why we have a lower instance of male human trafficking instances. It's less than 5%, but the problem is it's also underreported, and any males that surface are reporting as a female or a cis or another gender that gets lumped over to the girls' side of the care. And commercial sexual exploitation of children is called, it's CSEC, and then there's CSAM, which is materials in print or pornography or videography. So with all those things, there's so much to think about, but I think the easiest thing that you need to know that knowledge is power for you guys. And if you can go forward from today and just have an intelligent conversation without scaring somebody half to death, and I will send them this, but Ron's going to challenge you. Who's got a phone? So if you've got your phone, can you take it out right now?
Yeah. Actually, it's a good challenge.
This is what we did across the province in 2019 when we introduced the word corridor to Ontario. And that was a 16-year-old survivor I worked with, who looked like Pippi Longstocking and talked like Bob Marley's daughter.
Yep.
That she challenged us that we had to stop creating posters and images that did not represent what human trafficking victims look like or the buyers. And please help me to remember that after you do this.
I will.
And by the way, 911 to get Ron out is faster than calling a hotline that you can be anonymous on. So if you're not afraid to drop your info, please just call police, and I'll review 3 or 4 things about how to call police. Please don't go ahead and play detective. Don't even take your phone out and take a picture. You could put not only yourself at risk, if somebody notices you doing this, you need to remember these are criminals. They do not want to go to jail. They do not want you to identify them. They do not want you having the license plate or the color of their car. You have to do visual things in your head and then walk away. Do not take your phone out. But when you do take your phone out after you've suspected somebody maybe isn't making eye contact with you, maybe somebody isn't allowed to talk for themselves, maybe they're dressed really inappropriately for the weather or don't really know what community they're in because they've been moved around to 10 different cities in 30 days.
Yeah.
And I've actually worked with 15-year-olds that's happened to them. They don't know where they are.
It's multi-jurisdictional. We were talking about a girl who was in the room for 3 months, didn't even leave the hotel room or motel room, right? So that the challenge is for everybody who has a phone, it's to put the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline number in it, so you have it available. So I'll give you the phone number.
Turn your phones on, and Ron's going to get you guys action. He's not making you stand up and
no
activities.
Nothing like that. No, just put in the number in your phone, so if you do see anything after today, you have that on there, and you can call these hotlines because it is multi-jurisdictional.
And they speak 200 different languages.
So the phone number is 1-833-900-1010.
And they do.
Sorry, 1-833-900-1010. Now, if it's immediate, obviously you call 911. But if it's just
if you're willing to identify yourself.
Yes, 1,000,000%. So that's a different story. So if you see, like in our neighborhood, right, we have everybody's connected, everybody wants to pipe up, but then the reality is for serious things like this, which are very subtle, before you know it, well, if you call us, we need you as a witness to come to court. And for some people, it's uncomfortable because they're like,
Or also to validate they're not shifting you off into another area while they commit a crime somewhere else.
$1,000,000%.
Not that I'd know that, Ron.
No, not at all. But it's also that. But if you don't feel comfortable coming forward, but you still feel obligated to want to report it, this is almost like a Crime Stoppers, but specifically for human trafficking.
What is it? So it's called?
It's called
The Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking Hotline, and
Yeah.
we introduced it in the province of Ontario through Project En Route.
And you were part of that project.
We started the project.
There you go.
I tell you, all the sleepless nights to put that together.
But now you got the on-call, so it's a Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. You can use that number. Now, Kelly, you were talking about definitions before you had all of there. Now you did. I do want to bring this up because
And I do have some local resources. So if you do take a business card and you email, I'll shoot you the local resources that are here.
Yep.
And what any of the gaps, just in case anybody has some time 2 to 4 in the morning to think about some stuff that you want to do.
Yeah, the
2
gap.
to 4 in the morning.
Yeah, 2 to 4. That's your gap time. So before we go there, I do want to hit a little closer to home, and I want you to. There's 3 ones here. All right. And
You can turn it. While
I'm going to
I
turn
talk
this.
if you want to.
I'm going to turn this. So I just want to refresh your memory with this one. Does
This is the worst one because she's still missing.
anybody remember this? Ever seen this?
Oh my God, I can't see it every time I see her.
How old was she in this picture?
She was 8.
So tell the story.
I lived in a building.
Never.
I was a teenager, so things were happening to me, and I know people were intersecting through our building. My brother was a playmate of this girl riding up and down on the West Mall in the elevator, 615 the West Mall.
So the people who aren't aware of the story, the best to your recollection.
She was going downstairs to meet at the pool. There was a condo, there was security. So she was just going down in the elevator to meet her friends at the pool.
And what happened?
She never showed up.
And why is this part of the slide for you?
Because it stuck with me because of what was happening to me, and I cry with intention. I don't think I cry anymore. I just leak because tears are very powerful, but I just resolved that everyone that I had a relationship with that has never been found or was found dead, that I had an obligation to not shut up. And I think I'm effective at not being quiet.
It's a superpower.
It's PTSD too. So I do have complex PTSD and a myriad of other things that there's acronyms for that would take up the alphabet, and you soldier through.
You do.
That's why I use horses though, because they help me heal.
That is the equine therapy
Yep.
for people. Now this one here, I don't know if people remember this. It's not as recognizable. Some of us
Amber
will.
Carey Potts. It's just a bad picture of her as well. She's from Etobicoke, and she went missing when Etobicoke had those lovely hotels down with heart-shaped beds with the glass ceilings.
Valhalla.
No, Valhalla is another story on the East Mall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Valhalla means hell, right?
So what happened
Sorry.
with her, the best of your memory?
She was actually intersected with Kelly Momberquette, who I told you about earlier in South Regent, was the 14-year-old prostitute that was found murdered. And the police weren't able to follow up because they wouldn't take the validity of other 16-year-old prostitutes' testimony, even though they had the arrest. And I was around. The guys that were involved in that were called North Preston's Finest. I have a tattoo that's NFP. So, you know, my intersection, they're from the East Coast and there's generational trafficking. By the way, traffickers can be family. It can be historic. They could be moms, dads, siblings, aunts, uncles. They could be sent in right now. I'm working with a case out of, trying to remember the communities. Brant
County?
And there's an international school there, and this young girl was sent from India, and they say she's a certain age to be able to come in the country and go for educational purposes, but she's been found trafficked, and we've found out she's only 13. But there's people on this side that helped that happen, and there were people back home that sent her to make the money as a part of a ring.
So Brant County, for those who aren't aware, it's near Paris, Ontario. Okay, it's not too far out from here. It's about 45 minutes to an hour.
And so there's a triangulation to kind of Brantford, Brampton, Burlington, they're all on your radar.
The South Asian community in this particular case.
It is South Asian community, and so you know what? I am very tuned into. I love diversity. So my son is Jamaican Canadian. I have a Low German Mennonite daughter. We kind of represent. I grew up in downtown Toronto, and I'm a foodie, so that transcends everything. And so what I want to know is what is happening in other communities to give them what they need. And so we're seeing an uptick in Punjabi Sikh communities where girls are going missing, but also guys are posing as gangsters and, well, not, they're being gang members, and they're finding this is another way to make money. So it's hitting diverse ethnic communities. I'm working with the Canadian Council of Muslim Women right now, and we're translating all my training. I'm giving it away eventually to our government, and we're translating it into Arabic. Sorry, it's hard to remember. I have to see it in my brain.
Yeah.
Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, Somali, Punjabi, French. I think I've missed one. And somebody up at the University of Northern Ontario in North Bay is translating it into Anishinaabe.
Oh wow, First Nations.
First Indigenous languages. And I work on the island too. I go up to Manitoulin and I work with the Indigenous officers.
Okay.
This is the one that's the hardest to look at.
So this is the last one. I'll ask you out of these slides.
This is just before I married George. This is a year before I married George, and that
So I don't know if you guys
detective
can
is
see.
still a train wreck.
Okay, so that's a little girl. How old was she?
She was 5. She was 4. She was junior kindergarten. And I was running programs in Toronto then. This is before I moved out and really focused on this. I helped develop programs in the Lakeshore.
Mm-hmm.
And we started the first breakfast clubs in Canada, and that's the work I was doing. And then nobody would give me a job because I had a record, except a church. And so they'd hire me because they weren't afraid of me getting jumped and stuff too in their community, I guess, and working with some of the gang kids.
Yeah.
So this was a little girl that a lot of the youth that I was working with were her reading buddies at 2nd Street School on the Lakeshore.
So Topical.
Yes, and so she actually was found surgically dismembered in the rocks behind the house I lived at with my son. I was a single mom then.
Do you know what happened, or have you found out what happened?
Yeah, they were using her for sexual things, and she was sacrificed. They used her as a sacrifice and took her body parts and scattered them. They had to bring her mom from overseas because she was here with dad and stepdad. But the officer that came, this really rocked my community because there were over 200 kids I worked with at the time. And I had a German Shepherd at the time who was going crazy walking down by those rocks. So it really affected us. And when I saw that somebody could do that, and nobody knew she was missing. They got told she went back to Pakistan with family, and nobody knew, but somebody remembered that that had been said to the teacher, and the teacher, the kindergarten teacher, had the presence of mind 2 months later to report it to this detective. And that's when she was found buried among all the rocks where all the kids played near Marie Curtis Park.
Which is border of Etobicoke, Mississauga.
Yes.
It's literally on the border.
Yes.
Yep.
So that was the trifecta for me. And then a couple of years back, there was a gal named Christina who was, I love when the paper writes that they're known prostitutes since they're children. I spend most of my time correcting journalists, just like child prostitution is actually called child rape. Like, language is very important. We were looking for her for about 4 years and had tabs on her. She was getting moved all across the province and tried to exit multiple times. And because there was biker involvement in this instance, and there's 10 different tiers of types of pimps and handlers, madam, business managers. Those are the names for families, parents. she wasn't able to exit, and the last time somebody saw her was down at Mississauga Gates Inn, across from La Castile, very nice restaurant where pimps tend to take girls out if they've done extras. And so she was found in a shallow grave Christmas Eve 3 years ago. So when you understand that it might not seem like it initially, and if I fast forward it to give you context, today I was talking with OPP and a situation table, so Ontario Provincial Police, a situation table, probation and parole, children's aid, court support workers, about a 12-year-old. And the 12-year-old was just sneaking out of the house. So nobody really thought much of it, just a rebellious teen. No signs or symptoms other than not being around. And not knowing how to set up, like there's a bunch of stuff here that we're gonna send you guys that's positive stuff to do about prevention. It's not, how many of you were like teenagers? Okay, don't put up your hands. How many of you were teenagers? How many of you thought your parents were duh and you knew better? Okay, it's no different today. So when you say don't do this, look out for this, somebody's gonna snatch you, this is dangerous. We have to remember the culture of kids. You know this from all your psychological training for policing. Frontal lobe and cerebral cortex, this is the gas and the brakes, or this is the gas and the brakes. This is risk mitigation. They're not, there's no pathways. Nobody plugged the socket in yet. They cannot keep themselves safe. So we can't expect them to do it. We have to. And if we tell them don't, if you told me don't, that's why when I was 12, I stole a car and drove it to London from Toronto.
12. That's crazy. Yeah, but believable for you.
Well, and when I kind of broke out of youth incarceration, I was scared of those people that were going to hurt me, so I hid at the stables at the police station.
Downtown? For Jameson? Yeah, or
Kipling.
Kipling, yeah. At the time it was Kipling.
Yep.
Yeah.
For 2 weeks I was there. Nobody knew I was in with those horses and they didn't tell on me. So that's a really great story when I talk to officers. But the thing is, you got to know your kids' vulnerabilities. You can't operate in fear. If you do, you might as well lock them up in the house and bubble wrap them, because that's the only way it's going to work. You have to equip them to decision make, and that includes letting them make some smaller mistakes that aren't life-threatening. And you know, if you understand what the internet safety threats are, don't vilify the phone, because that's the first thing they're going to need to call you if they're not safe. So if you vilify the very thing, they'll start sneaking it. They'll start looking to apps and doing things. If some kid rocks up on a child pornography site, talk about it. Ask them, how did you feel when you saw it? They'll be like so embarrassed, they'll probably cough and sputter anyways. But kids between the ages of 8 to 12, 1 in 4 of them has had things sexted to them, forwarded to them, or being what we call sextorted. 1 in 4 between 8 to 12. And the level of violence that they are being sent in images, we have to let them talk. Because if you are the talking head and we all sound like Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 it's not going to work. And if we, you know, those that are exploiting kids, they are getting them to tell them their deepest, darkest secrets, their desires. They're drawing that out of our kids as trusted adults. So we don't even, you know, we don't use the word find a family member or a teacher you could trust. You can't use that language. You have to teach your kid what a trusted adult is and help them recognize who that person is and have that person named, and give your kids permission. If you can't tell me, you can go talk to Aunt Sally so-and-so, right? But then you can't breach that. You have to trust that. You can't kind of meddle and use it as you can't use it as your intel, Ron. You've got to trust your kids. You don't trust the criminals, because those criminals are conditioning your kids not to trust you. And then you behave a certain way, and they've forecasted that like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the kids are like, they're right. This person that's listening to me, they're right. And there's the wedge. And the whole job of somebody that's exploiting kids, especially, is to isolate them from every support. Traffickers will even go and meet families as boyfriends. They'll be grooming them for 2-3 years before they actually turn them out. And they will put a wedge. They will be best friends with that family. And then they'll threaten that kid, like, I'm burning your family's house down, or we're skinning your cat alive, or your sister, if you won't work, your sister's next. And kids, I know there's probably questions. We'll give you guys some time for questions. But one of the things I get asked all the time is, how does it go unnoticed? Well, how many hours a day are they at school? They have lunch. There's bathrooms at the school. There's been traffickers that have set up in bathrooms in high schools, knocked out cameras, brought buyers to the school. Kids have worked and gotten sent home. They train kids how to upload pictures of their girlfriend's place. I'm sleeping over. They teach them how to date and timestamp stuff to send it to parents. This is why you've got to be savvy. There are special screens to take and special apps, and you know this from your cybercrimes people. The worst app was this calculator that everybody in high school said they needed for math, and it was a backdoor gateway to a dark website that the kids knew the code to open it and get in there, and they were getting paid back in Pokemon coins for sending nude images. The way kids date nowadays, we have to know what they live in. And they date by sending each other nude pictures. It's their world. It is the way things are happening. So equipping our kids not to feel shocked or threatened, and be able to talk about how they feel about that, being able to talk about whether it excites them a little bit, like they're hormone machines, right? Come on. And giving them permission to talk honestly is going to build your bridge of trust with them, that if and when something's happening and you have to step in, they're going to trust you to act on their behalf and not feel ashamed, because the number one emotion that a trafficker uses is shame. And parents also feel ashamed. So traffickers are going to look for behavioral problems, any kind of esteem, a minority status, or an orientation confusion, anything they can use. History of abuse or neglect, or even hovering parents. They'll talk about what a hovering parent looks like and why they're better, and they'll sell them the dream. If they've even seen violence or abuse, or even arguing in their family, the trafficker will use that and say, isn't this how it is at your home? Well, that's not going to happen with me, baby. Any problems with caregivers, substance abuse, any criminality in the family, poverty issues that they've seen, do what I say, not what I do. So if you're going to talk to your kids about being responsible with digital stuff, you better be modeling it, because if I come to their school, I know what I'm teaching them. So when I go to school, I get the kids to hold up their phones, and I say, okay, I want you to go home and talk to your parents tonight. I'm a flip the dial girl. So I want you to open it up, and I want to find on your parents' phone, ask them what their favorite app is. So first of all, you want to check and make sure there's actually a lock and parents need to have it, or kids don't get a phone. You pay the phone bill? Mm-hmm. And the other thing parents need to know, if there's child pornography on the phone and it's in your phone bill, you can be charged. That phone's in your name. Mm-hmm. So your kids need to know that if they're sending sexual images and somebody's sending them back and the phone bill's in your name, there is child pornography, according to the company, in your name. You'll have to, we'll just leave that where it is. So they go to whatever app, and I tell the kids, take your parents to their app and I want them to open their friends list in front of you and get your parents to scroll. The kids love doing this. And I want you to get your parent to put their finger on and stop the scrolling on the first person that is in their friends list that they couldn't touch. They have not met physically, that's on here. And when they get to do that with their parents, it's funny how many kids will go back and do this, especially when you explain why. And not out of fear, but say, you're worth knowing who you're talking to. Instead of, look out for the white van, they're gonna come pick you up. And that is a better way. Not being critical, not thinking not my child, because every single parent that I've talked to whose child has been trafficked, that's what they have to deal with. And believe me, it's, you might think it is never going to happen to me, and God forbid it ever does, because once it does, you can't cross back over that line. But the vicarious trauma that parents also suffer because of the level of guilt that they feel in this also needs to be addressed. So it's an additional burden on community. So the protection is an adult job, and it starts young. So the younger you can start having open conversations, that you can sit as a family and open one person's phone and play on it together and get that going where you have open conversations about your phone. You don't just sit and do this. You actually go to your kids, look at this. Have you ever seen this? What do you think about this? What do you think dad should do about this? When you start involving the kids and give them the capacity to mitigate risk and don't vilify the phone, the traffickers are not going to be happy. You'll build self-esteem in their capacity to use devices. And by the way, the 12-year-old that we were talking about today in a situation table, they found her twice in cars with guys that have driven halfway across the province to purchase her. And so she's still not protected. I'm still fighting for her. We're still figuring out how this goes, because these kids are returned home. And they're going to school online. Well, guess who they're going to school with? Could be going to school with anyone's children. And traffickers teach them to recruit. Soft recruiting. So if you have open communication and you can be someone that the teens in your life can talk to, and you tell them it doesn't matter what you talk to me about. I was really fortunate. I had good mom mentors who said, if you create opportunity for your kids to tell you the truth, and so I used to say to my son, he's now a firefighter in Toronto. Sorry, Ron, he's a firefighter.
I know. He's a calendar boy.
Pretty much.
That's the term, yeah.
He was always told, and wiser women than me taught me this at a parent-child center, that as long as he's telling the truth, he will never be punished for what he tells me. There might be natural consequences for what happened, but there's no punishment for telling the truth. And so I had a kid who was ridiculous, Ron. He would come home and go, I didn't eat all my sandwiches out of my lunchbox. Like, he'd be crying, right?
Yeah.
And I'd be like, that's okay.
Yeah.
So, and be proactive. Talk about what their online choices is like. I can send you this, the healthy starts, and how to give them tools to learn to keep themselves safe, and then test drive them. And if you have a breach, if somebody spams you and show your kids what happened, and then talk about how that can happen with other things. Your kids don't care. You guys don't care about if that happens to a bank account right now, do you? Because you just, this is the ATM, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not going to matter to them. Like, don't talk about things that are absolutely irrelevant, that they don't care about. Like, that's what we care about. Go talk to your friends about it, adults.
Yeah.
And then pick an online safety things that you can do together. So look at the stuff that's online, involve the kids, ask them how they would keep their friends safe. I have a friend in the UK that works on this. He's 18. He actually is a UN delegate at 18 years of age. And he created some stuff where he'd go to schools and talk about modern day slavery and the commodity trading, how it started, how the history of it started, that we're trading goods and then it became persons. And the kids were horrified. Like, what did you think if somebody came to your classroom and said, Joe sitting beside you is going to get sold to do some really yucky things for $500. What do you think? What would you think if your friend, like a friend, was being sold and taken away from his family? Would it bother you? Would you try to think about what to do to help? Those are the solutions right there. So your age, thinking of how you would speak up for a friend, or how you could support them, or what you'd be willing to sacrifice to help, there's the community answer, not only for this, but for gangs.
Yeah.
Right? I'm just quoting your stuff now.
No, it's a different place.
Yeah, but it's the same principle.
Yeah, it is.
Give them the power to self-direct. It's not like we can say empowerment, but it's still like, I'm the great and wonderful Oz and I have all this power. No, I don't. I'm just willing to test drive some ideas with you and let you make some decisions, and I'll go along the journey. So that's what you've got to do with your kids. Every kid in the community, we got to get back to community parenting. We're always locked in a house. Who cares? Doesn't it matter to you if you see a kid that's getting on the bus in the corner, if she went missing? That would affect you. So you can be proactive. Notice that kid if somebody else scoops her. Not the white van. Liam Neeson doesn't live in our neighborhood. So, and then model those digital habits in front of your kids. Model some things. Own your mistake with your own digital stuff, your phone. Talk about your digital addictions and how it causes stress with mental health. Don't harp on it. We don't have to initiate mental health in our children by over talking. But have us, there's a device, it's called a Circle, and it can track and turn off Wi-Fi at certain times of the day. Put one in your house, but then live with it yourself. Like my husband's like, oh my goodness, you turn your phone off now. What happened to you? And I think if we ask our kids before advising them, so here's the list, Ron. Do
Yes.
you want to do this one?
Sure, the way we talk matters, right? So don't create and share intimate images.
So
right?
if you're a kid and that's what your parents saying to you, what are you hearing?
So don't create and share digital images or intimate
You're hearing
images.
the opposite, I guess.
What's the next one?
Once a photo is on the internet, it can rarely be taken back. So it's out there forever.
What's the next one?
You can't control an image once it's been shared.
And the last one?
Don't ask anyone for an intimate image.
So my challenge to you folks is, how do we change that conversation when we're talking to young people? Did you hear all the don'ts?
Sorry, I'll flip it over.
So how about we say, only create images you want to share?
Talking
So-
affirmative, right?
Affirmative. Give them power and believe in them that they can make good decisions. And when they make a bad one or an oops, I'm trying to remember her name. I'm sorry, but it escapes me. She took her life. She was on the West Coast. Amanda Todd.
Yeah, I remember.
Amanda Todd's mother would tell you that this is exactly what happened. That people got a hold of some images of her
Yeah.
and threatened her to the point where she couldn't talk because she'd heard the words don't, and so she couldn't go tell parents, I did. So the other thing is, create this conversation and also say, but if you do, if you make a mistake, if somebody tricks you into this or you just have a weak moment, you need to come and talk to me so I can find out how you feel and what we can do about it together. Because that's the isolation piece. That's the biggest piece, is isolating them. I have a list of things you should look. You should actually give this to your kids, or if they're young, don't introduce them to these sites. Like OnlyFans, Loyal Fans, Is My Girl, Frisk, AVN Stars, Fan Centro, Is My Guy, Inked Girls. So these are subscribe sites where traffickers look for algorithms. Years ago, one of the things they were looking for is, when everybody was writing on Facebook, by the way, your kids only have Facebook to talk to the grandparents like me.
100%, yeah.
And fool us so I don't look on their TikTok or their Snapchat. First place I look. Last place I look. Oh, Grandma, look at your look at your Facebook. Yeah, right. Need to go look at your site.
Yeah.
So don't alert them. But if you find any of these things on your child's mobile devices, they're usually subscribed. So it would take an adult to subscribe for them, and that gives a footprint for police to find out who's doing this. I've worked with a lot of young people that they didn't disclose till 10, 15 years later because they still didn't know what happened to them. There's an open case in St. Thomas right now that a young girl in 2013 disclosed to somebody while they were at camp, and there wasn't enough information for charges, and it took until June of last year. Now she's an adult finishing university for her to be able to come forward. And there was actually somebody that was a musician, music teacher, who was being endorsed by the 4 high schools in the community to send your kids to, who was trafficking children and was already on the sex offender registry as the Eaton Center creeper. Remember that?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I heard the stories of that.
Skirts and escalators and mirrors on their shoes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if anybody's got mirrors on their shoes, you can stomp them.
Yeah.
If Ron has to come and bail you out, then tell him that.
So you'll be okay.
But there's some sites that this should just alert you if you see them on the phone. Again, don't panic. Have the conversation about why they're there, what's important. There might just be like a star that's on it and they're starstruck and following them. So there is in-person sex trafficking. That's physical acts that are happening. And one of the things is that traffickers seek opportunities in that to continue operating, and they're not leaving traces of location or identity. They're trying for law enforcement not to find them.
So we can go. I'll be right back.
Yep. It means that they move, if they get nervous about that, they can move their whole operation into cyberspace. So they could go offline and now be hiding. And then the cyber sex trafficking, it gives traffickers another layer of protection because they're not having to move locations. There's not a physical locale. They can remain more anonymous, use pseudonyms, photos, private networks. You know, you've heard of VPNs. So they're a lot harder to trace. And there's more excitement for traffickers about this because the buzzword for kids is cryptocurrency, right? So if they're paying in Bitcoin, Pokemon coins, fake doors on gaming sites, where there's a background that they can open into another room, and they can take kids off into another room. So it's okay to be a gamer. Believe me, it's okay to be a gamer. But I can tell you, I have a woman that's really smart, and she's got 5 kids, and her kids are all gamers, and one was 17 and playing on a game, and the person they'd been playing against, they've been challenging because they're racking up points and they're beating people and they're moving up, right? And didn't recognize right away that they were actually playing an older adult that was a programmer and was actually somebody that tried to have sex with children. And so eventually said something to their mom, just said, there's just something really weird about this. And mom, who was on my board of directors and in the legal field, lost her crap in my office and then calmed down a little bit. And I said, well, just go back and ask your kid to show you what it is. And don't make your kid stop playing games. Just figure out what you're going to do about this person and help your kid to know what not to be sending them or saying to them. You know, kids should not have to stop playing games. It's not the game that's trafficking the kids. Is that a good message? Good message. It's not the games. It's not the apps that are trafficking. It's criminals that are behind it. So, and then there's sexting. 1 in 4 teens, they're receiving this sexually explicit texts. 1 in 8 children between 8 and 11 have reported forwarding or having something forwarded to them without their consent. And then, it's like the bad Miss Clairol commercial that I'm dating myself talking about. We told 2 friends and so on, and it just gets sent all over. That really ruins kids' reputations, and some have had to leave school boards. Parents move to completely other side of the province for child safety. And sexting is so commonplace. 14.8% send and 27.4% receive sex. And it's a growing number. It's a serious crime, and somebody could just be threatening. And they could threaten to distribute it and be extorting kids out of all kinds of things, like money, clothing, jewelry, sex, electronics, iPods, earbuds. If your kid's stuff starts going missing, and they're really stressed out talking about it, they could be being extorted for it. It's a very serious crime. The real problem is that once that photo's out, the control is gone. And so even working with our government in the last couple years about MindGeek and Pornhub, I don't know if any of you guys have heard about all that stuff. They're based in Canada, and what's happened is the images get sold and recirculated. They'll just put somebody else's head on somebody's body that's been in a forced rape video. And every time that's shared or even taken off the internet and shared privately, that person's re-victimized. And so it never ends. And so they never gain control back of that part of their life. So we can talk about some case studies and stuff to do, but I'm going to do shameless plug now, if that's okay.
No, by all means.
So these are screen cleaners, just to remind you. So we love when we can use the OPP's money. They're good friends. They're very good allies, and they're policing right across the province. So take a screensaver. This has got a magnet for the fridge, but it reminds you about where to call your OPP and be responsible if you see trafficking along the highways. So take one of these. These are freebies. This is just me being ridiculous with accolades. Don't take this. And COVID hair, don't care. The books, there are 26 stories that are about resilience and hope. They're not all about trafficking. I have a chapter in here. My son has a chapter in here, growing up as a child in a very difficult community and goal setting. By the way, we had cops in our family when I grew up, so if my grandpa was still alive, my son would probably have to sit at the kids' card table for Thanksgiving because he's a firefighter. There's really great stories. There's a takeaway at the end. There's 26 of them. The whole reason we wrote this book, really, I don't have time to be vain. It's too tedious. We wrote this book because there was 2 young girls that couldn't get their English language credit. So I guess this will be the case study piece.
Yeah.
When this young girl was first found, she was 12. And she was one of the girls that would just go missing for an hour or 2, and they thought she's down the block playing, British Bulldog, or everybody went to somebody's house to watch whatever, play My Little Pony, and then she'd come back. Nobody knew that somebody would see the collective of kids, like white picket fence community, good community, and the kids would play collectively, that this one kid would go missing for a couple hours, and they'd take her and work her and then bring her home. She got really messed up. Eventually, so nobody noticed for a while, and eventually she went missing, and she was found the first time, I believe she was just outside of here, near Blue Beacon, Milton. And so she was able to put together some testimony, and she put 3 bad people away in jail. By the time they went through court, she was 13, and she was a little messed up, had lots of trauma, and nobody knew how to support it. It was very early on, kind of in this battle. Fast forward, she goes home, she starts acting out. She doesn't know what's happening. She doesn't know her brain is fractured, that she legitimately has neural pathway damage in her brain. but we're glad for neuroplasticity, especially in children. And so they got a hold of her again once they were paroled out, 2/3 sentence. So by the time they went to court, they'd gotten a lot of time served, and then they paroled out. But at the same time, she got returned home, and things were supposed to go back to normal. They showed up, and they took her because they knew her. So scooping usually happens when there's a relationship. So they took her, and they moved her. In 30 days, they moved her to 10 cities across the province. And now she was almost 14, and they were using her to peer recruit. So they'd start a relationship online on a phone with a young girl or somebody that, I said, what's the trend used to be on Facebook? TBH? Anybody remember this? So old school, eh? I'm such a dinosaur. To be honest. So basically it's a kid trolling that says, I will be honest if you ask me any question. By the way, Netflix and links means let's have sex and watch Netflix. Like, you just need to know the code. And that's even changed. That's like 10 years old. You just have to know what you're reading, what the memes actually mean. Some of them can be ads and be advertising whether somebody that's being trafficked is willing to provide sex without a condom, or double up and have more than one person available, or do backdoor, or like there's all kinds of stuff that you need to know how to identify if you see it in social media. Ron's head's gonna swim now.
No, I'm with you because it's the same game, right?
Yeah.
The recruiting game is the same game.
It's the same.
It's the same game. Yeah.
Same outcome. Money.
Same
Money
outcome.
and status, right?
Money and victimization.
Empty status too.
Yeah.
Empty status that only has one resolve. You either exit or you die.
Yeah.
And exiting sometimes is death.
And that's the perceived. Like, it's either if I don't leave, if I leave, I will die.
Yeah.
Or so I'm stuck. But the reality is there's options.
Yep.
But they don't know it. Yeah.
That's why the girls
Yeah.
can't argue with me that I work with.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're going to deny my existence? Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm right here in your face.
Mm-hmm.
So this girl that's in one of these chapters, so from 12 till 14, and then she gets scooped again, and she's now recruiting across the province because they're threatening to go back into her household. And all the promises that were made, and this is why I work with industry sectors like officers and victim services and trauma nurses. We train at hospitals for grand rounds. We take police officers and lawyers and doctors. That's who we train. Last year we trained almost 3,000 people to understand how their industry could help with this, prevent it. Because one is too many, right? Can we just, like, if you guys only ever prevent this from happening to one, that's enough. You've done your job, your job. And also, if you scare traffickers away from your community because they know that you guys are savvy, and it's harder to act criminally in a community that's understands what criminal element looks like, mm-hmm. and has prevention measures, and not afraid to have a number in their phone or to use it, right? Like, even going to your social media now, I want you guys to take these signs, take a picture of yourself with it, flip it over, hashtag it out, and then hashtag in your community. Traffickers are not going to come after you. People are like, we can't do this, the traffickers are going to go after us. No, they're going to go after somebody they can buy and sell. And if you're not a willing victim, you're too messy. They won't. So anyways, sorry.
No, don't be sorry. No, this is great.
So this young girl is pulled back in, goes through all this stuff, and now she doesn't trust any of the things that she was told. We're going to keep you safe. We can help you. You're not going to have to worry. She's not safe. She's being bought and sold. She's in 10 locations within 30 days, doesn't know where she is. And the last day that she was forced to work to provide buyers with sex as a 14-year-old, she had 10 calls. So she was forced to have sex with 10 people within a 24-hour period. So now she's doing crystal meth. because she wants to die. And the only way she can get rid of the pain in her heart from what's happening to her is to use drugs. She can't get out. She doesn't trust anybody. She believes her family doesn't care. You know, all the lies are just there. And as a child, you don't have the ability to put up that. I have a flat head because as an adult, I can go, shut up, shut up, shut up when I have bad ideas. Kids don't know how to do that yet. So she was found face down, asphyxiating in a pool of vomit in a smaller community. I can't remember if it was Kitchener or Cambridge, outside of hotels. And when the police were called and found her, she was dying, and she wanted to die because that's the only way her pain could end. She was so traumatized. She was catatonic. She was a Jane Doe, I think, for almost 7 days. She didn't know who she was. So they didn't know her age. It was before they were linking jurisdictionally with the flags. There's now flags.
As a result of Paul Bernardo. Yeah, that whole thing. There's now a major case system which links certain sex offenses all together, because on the inquest of Paul Bernardo, the breakdown was Paul Bernardo was popping up in different jurisdictions, but no areas were talking to each other. So the heightened severity of what he was doing.
There was no flag.
There was no flag. Now there's flags through Vi-Class and some other stuff.
And the flag that's the one that really I love is, even if somebody that's doing road patrols or traffic stops suspects a girl in the backseat of a car might be a victim, they can flag her name. So if down the road somebody else pulls the car over again, they can start tracking and seeing. And
that's also an additional tool.
Oh, it's amazing, because it builds the case that this isn't the first time that they've been stopped in a car and seen this stuff. Anyways, I'm just really proud of the police for working this hard and not giving up. And the cross-jurisdictional work, we saw 13 arrests last Thursday.
So you want to talk about that? Because you sent me a message about that. Yeah,
and
sure.
Then we need to talk about buyers. You can't leave tonight without hearing about buyers.
Yeah.
So this young girl, because she was a Jane Doe and she was catatonic and hyper aggressive, she actually assaulted an officer. So now she has a charge as a youth, so of course she gets sent to Portage, right? And somebody there it's a youth facility for young offenders. They had the presence of mind to give us a call. An officer said, this is the lady you should call. I couldn't bring a horse in, but I could bring videos of my horse in. And even that, and some of my training goes back to when I went out and met the guys from Wounded Warriors out west and understood their trauma training, right, for PTSD. So I carry that forward, whether it's in conversation or pictures of the horses, or they get to meet them. I have a 3.5-pound purse puppy, a Chihuahua with long hair. I take that with me if I need to. She started to trust. She actually was in trouble for violent acts at Portage. Like, she was trying to torch the place, and she was beating everybody, and it is actually co-ed too, so it's very difficult. We got permission for the first time from the judge that she could come to our farm twice a week, 4 hours a day, and they would transport her. And we went on a journey, and by the time she was 15, she dealt with her trauma, and they reduced sentence her to release her, and we helped move her to a different community. I say all that to say this. We just expect her to go back to normal life and start at school. She hasn't had a normal life since she's 12. How does she go to school? And the first day we send her back at 15, a boy sends her, okay, plug your ears. You can explain this later. They send her a dick pic. First day into the new school after not being there since 12. So we had it set up that she would come out to the farm after her first day and do a debrief. And she walks up the driveway, and she's still in my head every day, because now she's graduated from post-secondary and she's in the field of social work.
Good for her.
Of course. And she's a #1 best-selling author. Because at 16 we couldn't get her to go post-secondary because she couldn't really go to school and do English classes with that kind of nonsense happening. by the way, she showed me the picture when she came up the driveway, and I went, oh, no, okay, don't. And I'm like, what do you want to do? Hey, I don't know. So she went out to the barn, and she came back into my office and said, oh, well, here, I've got some pictures I'm going to send back to him. I'm like, oh, yeah. Do they show my address? Or any of my animals identified in the picture? Like, what has she done, right? In a response. Because usually the response from a girl is to lift her top. And she didn't. She took pictures of our fainting goats. She said, hey, nice picture. Here's some fainting goats. LOL. She took videos of goats fainting. And she actually dated this guy for a little while after and read him the Riot Act. But she couldn't get her English language credit. She couldn't go and be normal in school. She couldn't have conversations with other youth. She couldn't go to health. Can you imagine going to health to hear, or, do they still get them to put a condom on a banana?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Howie Mandel would put it on his head and blow it up with his nose.
Yeah.
But so one of the reasons we wrote this book was to allow two girls that couldn't go to school the opportunity to get their English language credit, to get their high school education. It was the only thing missing, that and volunteering for us.
Wow.
And so everybody wrote, it's $20, 100% of this goes to help a girl. So, you might ask the question, like, where's all the money going? Well, it's definitely not going right to victims. There's too many parameters around it. Most don't remember within the year window to disclose. So there's no housing for them. There's no ongoing trauma care. So when a girl calls me and says, I have my kid's baby buggy broke and I think I'm going to have to go strip to get a baby buggy, I am going on my social media and asking you guys to cough up right out of your wallets for a tax receivable donation, or buy a book, or buy a hat or a t-shirt. And by the way, if you put the information out on your signs, you can encourage other people to do something. So Ron knows this about me. I'm an unpaid CEO. To pay my life forward. My husband is probably rolling his eyes. It's the worst retirement plan anybody could have, but it's how I'm paying my life forward. And what do you want to know about buyers, Ron? What's your intersection?
It's the same thing. So it's victimization, right? It's identification. So the recruitment thing. So my background is gangs, right? That's what I'm an expert in, is getting a gang member out of a gang. So we hit the same people, which is how we connected, right? Because it's the same recruitment tactic, the same risk factors that apply to young girls that get them recruited and groomed into finding somebody to give them the attention and give them a sense of belonging, and then victimizing them, putting them in a sense of shame, is the same thing with young men, majority of them, in the gang life cycle, where it's a little bit of a different tactic, but it's the same outcome as you'd mentioned. The tactic being,
it's like a business principle.
It is always business. It's always business, right? There's three main purposes of a.
So entrepreneurial.
They're very entrepreneurial, right? There's three main purposes of any gang, and this is like historical. It's to control a territory. So think about it in sales, it's a region. We control a region. In sex trafficking, it's what's our block. The third one is to collect debt. In this case here, it's service and collect debt.
And collect debt can also be trauma bonds, because if they take them to McDonald's, the girl can owe them $25. I've had girls sold for $20,000 into sex tourism to pay back money for the drive-thrus.
And gang members will do the same thing. So they will recruit young kids as young as 8, 9, 10, bring them in, buy them small things like McDonald's, give them a bicycle, have them take a package, which the kids don't know is drugs or guns, on their bicycles. And then as the kids get older and they get groomed to this style of, this guy takes care of me, well, they set that kid up when they're about 12 or 13.
They'll actually steal the drug. They'll tell the kids to plant the drug somewhere and hide it, and then they'll go in and steal it, and that kid is indebted.
Yeah, in one particular case that I had, guy got recruited in at 12, transporting guns and drugs, ends up going to take over a couple pounds of weed at the time. This was over 10 years ago, about 14 years ago. Took over a couple pounds of weed, got robbed, got stripped naked, had the bike taken from him.
It was a setup.
It was a setup. When he came back, they said, now you owe us debt. You have to pay this off.
And they can never work it off.
Never. It was 3 or 4 years into him working off the debt from the initial rep.
And the same thing happens to girls. they can grow into women owing these debts.
So let's talk about the buyers. You know what? I'll open up to you guys. What do you guys want to know about the buyers? This is for you. So any questions to that? So legally,
There's no
buyers.
wrong
Yeah.
question. So whatever's percolating in your head, if it's in your head, it's in somebody else's. That either they're here or they're going to be watching on camera.
Yeah. So the buyers face like limited to no repercussions legally, in a weird way.
No, well,
In a weird way, I'll say.
right now we're not seeing a lot of arrests being made towards buyers, which actually should be happening, and we should be talking to our police chiefs and our police officers about what is happening to buyers. And then the second conversation is to our Crown attorneys. So why are we allowing them to plead out? If we should have a John school. And I'm sorry for everybody that's named John. It's like I'm afraid. I know. That's okay. Somebody works for me named Romeo.
Nice.
And Romeo Pimp is the #1 type of pimp. But then again, I've been called a Karen because I drove a big truck and I had short hair. So we're just all the way around. I digress. So the #1 thing that people should know about buyers, those that are purchasing sex to commodify somebody for their self-gratification, is that a lot of times they don't understand they have no idea when somebody's being human trafficked. Regardless of whether somebody's being human trafficked or is into what people call choice in sex industry, I will not call it sex work because I can't validate the work when I know it was created through colonized, patriarchal, misogynistic practices, and it's not self-empowering to me and it's very offensive to the survivors that I'm networked with across the globe, and especially to some of my sisters that created the very laws by standing up in Parliament after Robert Picton was cannibalizing prostitutes from the west side of Vancouver. One of the things that's important to note is there's nothing, talking to the young girl that wrote in here, she actually did a piece as a silhouette once she was 18. It was very difficult for her, but she decided to come forward and do an interview to talk about the fact that he knew she was 12. And so he validated himself by thinking he was gentler, he paid more, he was a regular, so she didn't have to be afraid. There's all this validation in the mind of a buyer, and the majority of them are male. So does anybody want to know the stat on what the demographic of a buyer is?
Yeah.
68% are Caucasian male, married or grandparents, low median income of 75K, can be landowners, entrepreneurs, business owners. Does that change what we see in our communities on the front page of highly racialized pictures that are police blotter pictures, the racialized pictures of pimps? Because they would not be able to commodify anybody if they didn't have a market. And so I want you to frame in your mind and start to think what drives it. Well, the porn industry does drive this. And so we have to understand that if somebody has a problem with this, we can't vilify, we cannot man-hate. Sorry to men and boys in the room, but we cannot hate you. We need you as allies, as part of the solution seekers, that you figure out how to have the conversations about some difficult things to hold other men accountable, but create circles of care and healing. Because if somebody has a porn addiction or an addiction, a sexual addiction that they can only seek to satisfy by being with an oppressed or commodified person, they are living in a measure of guilt and shame too, and need to be free. And think of the secondary victims. What about that guy when he gets arrested? So that's where I'm awash, like, yes, arrest the buyers, but I'm also like, if we just name them all in public, what also happens to their wives and their daughters
Their kids.
and their kids. And I've had girls come and do some work with me on their trauma because their dad was named and they were slut shamed at university and accused of being the daughter of a pedophile, and that their dad, was sexually active with them, and this young girl became suicidal. So we have to understand it's a bigger crime. And for me, I guess I'm a little old-fashioned, right, Mr. Franklin? That I just believe that intimacy is being stolen from somebody that should be on the receiving end and work through some stuff. And we can't, it's not a drive-through solution. To rock up and be 15 minutes in a hotel or be in the bathroom at McDonald's. You want to know some of the places this happens. The laundromat, a park. It happens in places you would never think. Because, let's be honest, it takes 15 minutes or less. We like to watch the Viagra commercials, but they're not true. But that industry also drives stuff to be happening too, where partners aren't accommodating one another, so they're going outside. So we need to really take a look at ourselves and say, is there a neighbor in our community that's upstairs watching egregious porn, that's thinking of purchasing child pornography right now? And the answer is, in your community, probably more so than the drug trafficking. Although there is sex trafficking happening in your community, I can't talk about it, but I'm talking about it. But when we start to have these conversations about it and take responsibility as a community, we can't just point over there. We have to ask. It's like responsible buying, locally sourced.
Yeah.
You don't want locally sourced stuff when it comes to this. So how can you be responsible to prevent it? Start having the conversations. And young kids get dragged to this and they roll their eyes and like, my friends don't understand it, blah, 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 and whatever. Yeah, but you know what? If it happens, so maybe it's not going to happen to you or you or you or any of your kids, but how can we prepare you to talk to a friend if it happens to them? Because maybe you're smart enough and it's not going to happen to you, but if you have a friend and it happens to them, it's going to affect you. And you're going to feel horrible if you don't know what to do. So if it happens to one of your friends, you have to talk to an adult that can be trusted. And if it's not your parents, find an adult your parents trust and get permission that could be your speaking buddy.
So Kelly, thanks.
Buyers.
No, it's buyers are...
Buyers beware.
Buyers beware. So there is other stuff that happens behind the scenes with buyers, because unfortunately, general public who's not involved on our side of the house think very layered, right? So the first layer is buyer did something wrong, we got to get them, bring them in jail, and that everybody should get it. But Kelly brings up a great point. It's the impacts of that, and that's not to say that's not why we don't do it. Just for the record, I've never worked specifically in human trafficking, but I've come across it multiple times.
Can you please just put the words "yet" behind that sentence?
Yet. But behind all of that, the point is for us on the legal end, we have to get successful prosecutions. And the successful prosecutions mean we need an abundance of
2%.
evidence. It's crazy.
Less than 2%.
That's on the conviction rate, right?
Yes.
And the reason being is because when we have a young person or any victim of human trafficking who's gone through all of this trauma, well, they have to testify in court, and while that's happening, and we arrest them today, it might not be 2-3 years until we get to court.
It's now 18 months, or else the judges.
That's right, it's been changed.
But the judges will kick it out if that girl's not prepared too.
That's right.
And then she's done. We had a case in London, and the girl was ready to roll and had COVID, so they kicked her out of the courtroom, and then they dismissed it because it went over the 18 months.
Because that's a charter infringement for the rights as an accused person. But I want you to think of this, all right?
Rights of the victim, rights of the accused before the victim.
So I'll ask you here, Kelly, let's do some basic math here just to show you the impacts of this, all right? So you said that an average pimp, we'll say for the sake of the car, how much would they make on one girl?
250 to 350K tax-free
Okay.
a year.
Okay, so let's say 250K a year. Now, you and I had a conversation not too long ago about somebody who had an astronomical amount of girls that he was pimping. I don't know if you remember the number.
30.
30.
Well, and then international stuff as well.
And international, the number was in the hundreds.
Yes.
Hundreds.
But he had like layers, straight up run like a business.
He did it
like the operations that you've seen.
It's 100% an economical process. All right, now this person here has
And they're never out of product.
never, and they're not what you think in terms of just, you know, they take these girls, they get them on drugs, they manipulate them, and they victimize them.
They don't all look like messy gang members.
They're very
Business
smooth.
people. They could
Right.
be people that own businesses,
Yep.
companies, limousine services, escort services, massage services,
And some
etc., etc.
And some treat the girls very well.
Oh, they take the girls to the gym. They make them work out. They make them weigh themselves.
They take them for dates.
They nutritionally make sure they're nutritionally sound. They
Yep.
set them up in huge houses in Markham.
Yep.
Do you remember the arrest in Markham?
Yes.
Where they couldn't figure out what's going on in that house.
Yes. It led to big things.
Airbnbs.
So now you have, let's just say, a guy who's making $9 million a year cash, locally with 30 girls.
And in reinvesting that into drugs, crime, guns.
And it grows. Now this person has an endless supply of money, and now this girl is our prime witness. It's come and testify about all the horrible things this guy did.
So
Now
who were these girls' buyers, though?
the buyers are there, right? But I'm saying for the court purposes, right? So now we have 18 months to have this prosecution. Now that girl has to testify. Well, everybody's innocent until you're proven guilty. Okay, we have the onus, the responsibility to prove your guilt. Now this girl who's 14 or 15, who's been victimized, who's now 17 or 18.
And we're telling her, heal.
Heal,
Deal
heal.
with your trauma, forget it, move forward.
Well, now when she testifies, there's something called cross-examination by a defense lawyer. And the defense lawyer's purpose in this particular case is to prove...
Just watch what happens with Johnny Depp and Amber right now.
Oh, right now it's a big one. But the defense lawyer
Shake him up.
has every right to question the authenticity and believability of the witness because he's defending his client. So now they are going to dissect that person on the stand about everything that happened. Now I want you to think, if you are, you know, a human trafficking survivor or involved into that system, how many interactions have you had?
Capacity. Do they have the
don't.
capacity to repeat the same statement that they gave originally?
No.
So that's why we also work with VWAP.
Yep.
So we can remind that young person that they are allowed to refer to their written statement and not
Yes.
open their mouths. We just have to.
So VWAP is...
we have cases right now all across the province that we're waiting to
Yeah.
go into court with.
Yeah, so VWAP is a victim witness assistance program. So it's for specialized cases like this. They apply to guns and gangs as well, but they also apply to sex trafficking and all those cases. Anyway, it's a lot more complicated than what it appears.
And it's easier for the Crown to prosecute on what? Your stuff
Yes.
than our stuff.
So they will go then the organized crime route
And
where
they'll
you have
weed out. So what happens
tangible
with
things.
the registry?
registry being the sex offender registry. If you don't have the designated offenses, they bypass the sex offender registry.
So how many times could they show up under your radar and go through court without ever being acknowledged
countless.
in the community as a sex offender?
Countless. And for us on our end, we disclose everything we had in terms of a prosecution. But the most frustrating about policing, which is your world as well, is we cannot ever tell how much we actually know to protect our sources of information.
No.
We can't ever tell people.
There's a level that I'm allowed to know.
Yeah.
There's a level victim services can know, and then
Yeah.
there's another level.
Yeah, it's to protect your sources, like journalism, right? If somebody's willing to come forward and tell you what's happening confidentially, you have to honor that to the millionth degree. You have to be willing to lose your job to honor that. Like, that's how sacred it is.
Yeah.
And you'll never lose your job because the Supreme Court of Canada gave it the blessing to say that's privileged. You cannot be touched.
Yeah.
Under two circumstances. One is when your source says, I'm willing to come forward and testify, which I've never ever had, and I've had sources on terrorism and some other violent stuffs. And when our Crown attorneys have asked in a particular terrorism case, they wanted my confidential source to come forward and testify because of the legalities around hate speech, which stemmed the terrorism about 10 years ago. I called my informant, and a normal person was like, are you crazy? I said, yeah, I got it. Like, I
have
got
to
it.
ask.
I got to ask, but didn't do it. And then the other way is called innocence at stake, which means that I'm an informant for Kelly, but I've set you up. But the defense needs to prove that there's application for this. So there's only two ways. If either of those, well, if the second half comes to light, the prosecution will withdraw all charges
Yeah.
because of the privilege allowed to confidential informants. So if it's going to risk the identity.
And so that's why you can't conflate things just
No.
to get a conviction.
Yeah.
They have to stand. And that is, I have had lots of officers text me, phone me, and shed tears.
Yep.
That they have to have integrity to follow the law, but the criminals don't.
I said, I had this.
And as soon as you get ahead of it and we figure out how to deal with the crime,
Yeah.
they switch the game.
Yeah, but before we kind of close off and you guys can ask questions and have private conversations, I will mention actually this happened the other day, and it's good information for everybody to know. Totally ties into it. I was dealing with somebody the other day. They were dealing with something related to this field, but not identical to this. And they were frustrated because they were constantly on the receiving end of poor legislation. Constantly. And they were so frustrated that they were trying to play the game back to the other half that was involved in this. So one half kept on calling the police, kept on fabricating things, leading to this person being alleged of sexually assaulting their own child. Right? Person went through the case, or got arrested, went through, was deemed to be unfounded, which means it never happened. The person was very frustrated, had an incident, wanted to call us. The bottom line, and kind of what Kelly's saying, and what I advocate for as well, is your legislation has to go through, in this particular case, the frustrations that you might feel with what's happening, and if you feel like there's a direct impact, that doesn't come to the people enforcing it or working with it.
Yeah.
It's got to come through who you elect and whoever our local representatives are. All right, and we're talking like realistically.
We have a really good example of this one. How community impact shifts governmental will to work on things. And, one thing that happened is our province came up with a provincial strategy on human trafficking, and not only spoke up to create a strategy, but then they fully funded it.
So how did that start? What sparked this whole thing?
Well, some stuff around like Project En Route and survivors and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and people in violence against women circles, and police. And for us, it was 180 different industries coming together for Project En Route, where we basically, July 30th, almost shut down the highways and caused attention to it. And we found a way through these signs and just using your social media, having these conversations. When you put your name and a hashtag and put that out, and they see how big social media hashtag is growing on something like this, they notice. And so there's either power over or power with. And as the community, we're power with, and when they see that this matters to people that are voting and constituents, they'll move the dial. And they did. 130 members of provincial parliament crossed the floor, signed the giant sign, and agreed that we all had to work apolitically on this issue across industries, across ethnicities and sectors and orientation, across everything. It was an all hands on deck kind of thing. After that, coalitions sprung up. All of a sudden, everybody started to talk about it. Did you notice, like 2019, 2020, the conversations really changed around this and it became a thing? That's what happened, is people like yourselves that would do something like twice a year. You have other causes, you have other things to do in your life, you have things to support that Ron's policing in your community as well. We want less B&Es and less crimes with car theft in your home community. So it's not either what Ron's talking about or what I'm talking about. It's not either or, it's and also. So there's two key dates, and I will sing this song all day long. February 22nd is the National Awareness Day. We moved that dial, so the feds actually put that date out. So now in Canada, we have a National Awareness Day. Well, you might think, big whoop, it's still happening. That gives us permission to look at a report card about what our federal government is doing about this issue. Second date is July 30th. And that's the date we work off of because it's nice out and we don't want to stand outside in the snowstorm. Sorry, how Canadian of me. July 30th is the United Nations Day for awareness to end human trafficking. And so every year we do something and we give you an activity to do that you can share with your friends and you can figure out other creative things to do. Use those 2 dates to keep hashtagging this. When the government checks the hashtags for these things, they'll go, oh my goodness, this blew up. We had 24 hours of messaging July 30th last year, every 3 seconds that somebody was tagging out these socials. That's huge for
Big
24
time.
hours.
Big time, yep.
In Canada. They noticed. So when we go and talk to them, or when we help you to know what to say, what the issue is, make you aware of what the policy is, where the gap was. And where the gap was, Ron, was police were trying to help 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. And we have something in Ontario called the Child and Youth Act. Because of the Child and Youth Act, we had emancipation. So kids at that age could be treated like adults, so you couldn't go intervene as an officer.
Yeah.
If that kid said, I'm emancipated, I'm acting on my own accord, even though you see the trafficker there, you see the bruises, you see the money, you see the ad, you can't extract that kid to protect them. Number one thing we fought for, and everybody fought across this province, our attorney, is she Solicitor General or Attorney General? Sorry, I'm so confused.
No, Attorney
Sylvia.
General. She'd be the Attorney General. Yeah.
So Sylvia Jones.
Or maybe Solicitor.
I don't know.
Solgen's office, Solicitor General.
Yes.
Yep.
I had to remember the acronym.
Yeah,
Thank
Solgen,
you.
there you go.
Okay, time for more tea.
Yeah.
No, I'm brain farting. So she listened to what was happening in the province. She cares deeply about this. And it's not a political issue. Everybody in politics cares about the buying and selling of kids. It's a no-brainer. And they wanted to give more power to officers to be able to ensure that kids that were being trafficked, let me tell you, out of all the young people I worked with, there isn't one that hasn't said to me years later, I should have known. Because in the moment, and sometimes up to a year, 2 years, 3 years, they don't know they were being trafficked. They think they were dating, it was their boyfriend, whatever they had to tell their brain. They don't know. So if we're not giving police permission to keep these kids safe, can we now link that to the fact that 60% of all human trafficking in Canada initiates in the province of Ontario?
That's a great point.
Why would that happen? Because you can bring young people from anywhere in the country into Ontario and pimps can teach those kids to emancipate themselves, so police can't help. Not anymore. So the wheels turn really slow in government sometimes, but we saw this one move. So February 22nd, they announced a motion for this to change the Child and Youth Act. That's huge, to change that act. June 20th, the motion was unanimously approved and adopted. Police now have the power to do that, along with some other investigative things that have to do with hotels, with on-site demand, see registry.
Yes, which they comply with so far. We've had some, which is great, so they've been complying with it at a time.
So if they think there's a kid in there, they can look at the registry right away and see it doesn't match and see the license plates on the car before they're off and down the road.
Yeah.
So there's some good stuff happening. Who would like to learn how to talk to your politician to ask them if they're doing that? Would anybody like to write a letter maybe once a year to your politician? Like maybe you don't want to go speak or be a big yap like me, or like show your swag and your muscles and what you have to do to police like Ron does. I'm like, oh my gosh, Ron, I'm going to sit like 3 feet further away. Maybe I have some old gang moves in it.
maybe you'll be all right.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
So how many of you would like to just find one thing to do besides put a number in your phone? Do you have a women's organization that you go to?
Yes, I
Would
do.
you like somebody to speak? Would you like me to give you slides and teach you how to do a 15-minute presentation that you can do How about you go to your community, you do it. You go, you know, I've got people like, you go to your temple and do it.
Yeah.
You go to your mosque and do it. You go to your, oh, I always pronounce this wrong. Gador. Yes! I just have this thing in my brain. It just doesn't pronounce things right. You go to your church and do it. You go to the Kinsman. You go to Rotary. How many of you, maybe you would like to sit for 15 minutes and take the information somewhere and spread it? Or write a letter?
No,
Or share with your parent council and ask if everybody on your parent council is trained in this. Because you know what? If we go into the schools and we do this with the schools and we teach all the kids, that's good. But how many young people did I say didn't know in the moment that it was happening to them?
all of them.
They needed an adult. So how many of you would like to go to your parent council and say, I got a 10-minute presentation, I'm not allowed to come to your meeting?
So Kelly, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. On behalf of everybody in the Residents Association, we'll give you this nice certificate of appreciation.
Oh!
Thank you. And just a bag of milk to go along with that for you. So you got something to keep you warm at night. But thank you, Kelly, so much for coming, man. You're great inspiration. I admire all the work you do. I know everybody else does.
You've got a great community. Tell people, you know, don't, if they say, so how did it go? Just say, you missed it.
Yeah, you missed
And
it.
then
So,
send something up, and I'll give you what you need to talk to them.
and then we'll break out. And if you guys want to ask some questions, ask some questions. If not, I need to get a picture with you with the sign and.